Welcome to a Wednesday edition of the Damage Report. I'm Jayar Jackson. How you guys doing? I'm glad you guys could join us. Just checking a couple things, peeking out here and there, just decide what it is that we're going with. But I'm glad you guys are here. Thanks for joining with us. Go ahead and like, subscribe, share that damn stream, let everybody know what we're doing over here. As I'm still sitting in for John Iadarola as he's out getting used to this whole father thing. I hope he's caught the hang of it by now. I'll reach out and see how he's doing. But in the meantime, let's not forget, although I'm here in this chair, in this particular position, it is still Wednesday. And God, look, Big News Wednesdays, Rayyvana joins us on the show. What's up, man? How you feeling?
I'm feeling really good. We were just talking about baseball a little bit. Going to a Cubs game this weekend, super looking forward to it. Haven't been in years, so gonna have one too many in the, in the
So then one too many also equals what's the plan to do to get on TV? You're not gonna bring a sign in, you're not 15. But then you have to have some kind of way to get on camera. My way was always just to have my kid sit next to me because he always gets the camera on him anyway. So that was my
Yeah, my plan is to start a fight, so.
Shouldn't be too hard. We'll figure it out. I mean, I haven't been to Cubs games either. I'm not sure if they're as raucous and rowdy as Dodgers games are, but if they're anywhere near it, there should be a pretty good chance if you do it. Just throw a couple peanuts at the back of someone's head. It'll be over really fast. Thanks for joining us. Also, you guys, we're gonna jump into a lot of things going on today. We know there's always updates going on with Donald Trump, so please bear with us because there's lots of layers to it and lots of new players involved. But let's go ahead and start with the players he always goes and attacks. Jack Smith, let's go here. There's extra updates on the Jack Smith investigation to Donald Trump. Yeah, that's one of those 90 to 100 charges that's coming down on him already. And he's fighting it in every direction that he can. So yesterday, a federal appeals court partially blocked efforts by Jack Smith to access the seized phone records of Representative Scott Perry, who apparently was involved in some form or fashion with Trump's attempt to overturn the election. So he was a key figure in that whole thing. And this is what they found out. This is from Politico. The FBI seized the device from Perry in August of 2022. So they already had his phone, but it was under a court authorized search warrant. They had yet to access the relevant documents and communications after Perry then immediately moved to prevent it. And he cited that his legal privileges as a federal lawmaker and the authority of Congress to be free of interference from the executive branch. So because he's a congressman, he's saying you guys can't go to my phone records because it was official business trying to overturn an election. And this is what MAGA does. There's more. At issue with the court's interpretation of the Constitution's speech or debate clause, which grants immunity to members of Congress from criminal proceedings that touch on their official work, that's what he went with. He's argued that much of what Smith's team has sought is protected by this constitutional provision and should be off limits. And also during that argument, a Justice Department attorney now assigned to Smith's office argued that the speech or debate protection only applies to inquiries lawmakers conduct pursuant to some formal investigation or inquiry, not those that they embark on themselves. So just because you say you wanna jump into this whole thing of participating in whatever it is that you were up to, it doesn't mean that everything is protected into what it is that you should normally be doing. Again, anybody who voted for Perry here, is this part of the plan? Is this what was in his campaign ads and what he was debating for? I will make sure that I look to overturn anything that Donald Trump tells me to overturn, regardless of the legalities around it. And therefore, that's my official work. That's what he's arguing. See if it makes any sense to you. So House Democrats and Republicans, they also joined together to intervene in Perry's case, even without any knowledge of how this whole thing would work, because they're all very protective over that speech. And the whole clause they have here to protect themselves from their communication. So Democrat or Republican, they're still on the same side as this. So maybe he has a little bit of a foothold in his defense there, Ray.
Right, and I mean the fact that it's a bipartisan effort to sort of protect him is really telling about how our members of Congress that we elected that are supposed to be working for us want to protect their communications from us, because that's what it's about, right? They don't want the public to know what's going on behind closed doors. And I mean this man is directly implicated in criminal activity. I mean this goes far and beyond what is actually protected speech, because I fully understand that there are cases where the public should not necessarily be privy to certain information because it puts national security at risk. He put national security at risk by what he was doing. Having that information public isn't going to be damaging in that way. And this is not something that I think that he should have a right to privacy regarding. Absolutely not. This is something that the people need to know. And this is something that the prosecutors need to know to further their case. I mean, it's directly related to criminal proceedings. And it's disgusting to me that Democrats are jumping in to try to protect these communications.
And there's something there with that, because that was a little bit surprising as they keep talking about how the Democrats and Joe Biden's Department of Justice is coming for political opponents. Well, apparently, maybe you can highlight the time that they're actually assisting their political opponents, because it's not always about this cut and dry black and white thing that they say that it is. It's this team versus the other, and that's just the way these things work. Many times you will see Democrats go and help them out. Now, by the way, if you think about, they don't want the public to know his communications regarding this whole thing, but they want to keep telling the public what these communications were actually about and how perfect calls were and how perfect communications and interactions were. Why can't we see it, bro? They always complain about the lack of transparency with the executive branch only when Democrats are in office. But then when it comes to even representatives like Perry, we got to protect it, bro. We got to protect it. It was my official act. Mark Meadows is doing the same thing. There's other aspects of it though as well, because as we can tell, and also as I pointed out, they're trying to taint the entire opinion one way or another of the general public. That's something else that Jack Smith is dealing with as well, because Smith and Judge Tanya Chutkan, who's also assigned to this case, have repeatedly brought up their concerns over Trump's desire to do just that. The subject surfaced yet again about tainting these jury pools in a dispute over a motion that the Justice Department said it wanted to file under seal, with an accompanying redacted version to be filed on the public docket. Defense lawyers objected to this, counting that they were entitled time to review the Justice Department's filings and any proposed sealed exhibits before they could be docketed. But prosecutors said that it would be untenable to take several weeks to decide whether every ordinary filing that refers to sensitive materials may be docketed. They said that such a requirement would grind litigation in this case to a halt. Think about that point as we continue on, because that's the whole point. That's Trump's defense here. And it's particularly infeasible given the pressing matters before the court, including the defendant's daily extrajudicial statements that threaten to prejudice the jury pool in this case, as described in the government's motion. So it's pretty obvious. If there's enough of these things happening, they can change challenges here and there within this entire process. It'll slow things down, because his whole entire thought is, if I can stretch this out long enough, we can change this court date. And I say that's unfair, that we actually have a trial that happens within the next 2-3 years, then that's all fair and good, because he thinks he's gonna win the presidency and then completely change the entire makeup of our government, which will allow him to do whatever the hell he wants, which has been his objective since day one. Here's some of the things that he's been doing as far as trying to taint this and also coming after this particular judge. He put this out on Truth Social, as he mentioned, I'm sure they'll be very fair, is linking to this article that says that the judge in his January 6th case is a scion of Marxist revolutionaries. Sure, just as long as he says it, then I guess that's true for everyone that wants to read it. Another one though, he's going after Jack Smith. Is the deranged Jack Smith in Capitol, of course, the prosecutor who is continuously overturned due to his unchecked and insane aggression, investigating the political hacks and thugs of the highly partisan January 6th Unselect Committee for tampering with, deleting, and destroying highly confidential and classified documents, pictures, tapes, evidence, and all forms of other important information. By the way, that's a very long run-on sentence, Mr. Trump. If not, why? I fully believe that it's because the evidence in question destroys his fake election interfering case. Dismiss suit. Think of that last sentence. He says, I fully believe. Well, bro, that's just like your opinion, as you just said. I believe that. That has nothing to do with law. That has nothing to do with the process. That's just what you think. Somebody who does other crimes may believe that they're innocent too, but that doesn't always have to equal out with what they've discovered. One more. As he retruthed this from Mike Davis that said Judge Tanya Chutkan, an Obama left-wing activist judge in DC, whose husband also got appointed by Obama as a DC judge, last I checked, those things are not illegal, openly admitted she's running election interference against Trump. Just looking for that proof as well too. But as long as you say that these folks are appointed by Obama, from Clinton, from Biden, it doesn't matter. Just say that's the reasons why that they're biased. Doesn't that also mean anyone that has been appointed by Donald Trump is also biased? Who cares? Doesn't have to mean anything at all. One more, as Donald Trump is on a tear. This is why they have these stipulations in these bond agreements that say, hey, stop talking to the public because you lie a lot. Last one. The following truth is a quote by highly partisan Judge Tanya Chutkan, angrily sentencing a J6er in October of 2022. She obviously wants me behind bars. Very biased and unfair. Ray, there's a lot there, but this last part that stuck out to me with that whole thing, I mentioned other things that bothered me, but because she was, in his opinion, angrily sentencing a January 6th defendant in October of 2022, that means that she's unfairly coming after anyone else. Last I checked, judges can be upset when a criminal's in front of them and they have to sentence them and they reprimand them and talk about how horrible their crimes were and if they have any remorse whatsoever. Matter of fact, I feel like that's a part of what judges do a lot of times. They wag fingers and tell people how horrible they are, and this is why I'm gonna give you this kind of sentence because you deserve it and you have been breaking the laws in our country and you're a pariah here.
Yeah, it's particularly they do that when the person standing before them doesn't show any remorse for the crimes that they've committed. Particularly when it's like a heavier sentence that they're giving that individual. I'll say, I think it would be very difficult to put a gag order on Trump about the trial because he's running for president. So of course, then there becomes the issue of he's gonna be asked this question on the campaign trail. Are you doing election interference by preventing him from speaking and defending himself publicly? I think that it's more than fair, and as it comes to, and we've talked about this a couple times now on the show, tampering the potential, jury pool. There is not an unbiased individual in this country who would be able to sit on a jury and, without any prior knowledge of Donald Trump, make a decision on his case. So there, of course, there's already a level of, it's going to be extremely difficult to do jury selection. So when he is putting out these statements that are meant to intimidate people, that are meant to, stir up his rabid group of supporters, it makes it even more difficult to find someone to sit on a jury because people are going to be reasonably afraid for their lives that a Donald Trump supporter might come and do something horrible to them because it's a group of people who have done many horrible criminal acts in the past and in the present continue to. So these are people who have been doxing the grand jury that indicted Trump, members of the grand jury that indicted Trump in Georgia. So it's already such a limited group of people that you can choose from. So Jack Smith is exactly right to be, about the trial.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you froze for a second, so I wasn't sure if you had gotten the back end of your thought there. But this is the whole idea: delay. And then also try and make sure you make the jury pool as unsuccessful as possible. Let's put it that way. There's never anything that's actual legal proceedings or defense for the things that he's been accused of. There's been a shift though. There's other parts about what Trump is looking to fight that have a couple of new developments that aren't very good news for him though. Really fast here, because the Jean Carroll aspect of some of the things he's fighting with got slightly worse for him here though. Here's an update there. Jean Carroll, in her case after she won that defamation suit against Donald Trump before, was awarded, I think $5 million or so. There's another step because she's also sued him further because he said all kinds of things and went after her. So the judge presiding over that second civil defamation case against Donald Trump said in a forthcoming trial will only determine the damages that she receives, not whether or not he's guilty of it, because he's already been found guilty of that already. So the whole point here is just how much more money are you gonna have to dole out now, former President Trump? So the ruling that Donald Trump is liable for these defamatory statements he made about that writer, Jean Carroll, in 2019 went public, and here's that the documentation that's showing he's gotta go ahead and pay up again. Now, Trump's attorneys were concerned that there should be some kind of limit on what they then grant for this second level of this civil lawsuit against him, and I think they got rejected on that as well. So it could be more than the $5 million that she got the first time. And of course, Trump is gonna be appealing this constantly as well. It seems like that's pretty open shut as well. They've already decided one thing, it's just a matter of how much they'll give her in the second one. Your last thoughts, Ray?
I mean,
it's constant.
Last thoughts is this man is swimming in not just, indictments and charges, but also judgments. And I mean, the fact that people still support him, especially the amount of female Trump supporters who have just disregarded the fact that in that course of that trial, they found, that he did sexually assault her. Doesn't matter to them. It doesn't matter to them how many charges come down the line. Doesn't matter to them what he's done. they still support him.
Yeah, we saw presidential candidates raising their hand that they would still support him even if he was convicted of all these things that you would think they disagree with him doing.
The final say on this issue of eligibility, both on the former president or any candidate, will be decided as it typically is in the courts, both at the state and federal level. So you may see some secretaries of state make an initial determination based on our view of the law or what the law allows us to do. But no matter what determination is made, it will ultimately be fully resolved by the U.S. Supreme Court. We hope sooner rather than later to give us all clarity moving forward for this election cycle.
Just quickly, in the meantime, do you expect to have to make some kind of judgment before the Supreme Court weighs in about whether Trump shows up on the 2024 ballot in your state?
Potentially. I mean, our decision for the primary election plays out in just the next few months, and Nevada and several other states will be making decisions even before that.
There's the Michigan Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, talking about whether or not Donald Trump can be on the ballot even. This has been discussed before over the 14th Amendment, but there's a few new players that are trying to get this going. And she was talking about how she wishes that the Supreme Court would actually weigh on this soon because election season is upon us. Details here from Newsweek. The court distributed John Castro v. Donald Trump to the justices for a conference on Wednesday. It's ahead of the upcoming term, which is going to begin at the beginning of October. The conference is to take place on September 26th, and the case is expected to be decided on or before October 9th, again from the Supreme Court, about whether or not Trump can appear on many ballots in a few states that are looking to oust him because of more details here. Because John Castro, as you saw in that briefing name, or at least the name of this particular case, he is a tax attorney running for president on the Republican side. You haven't heard his name before because he's probably polling pretty low, but he is looking to get Trump off of the ballot in some of these states. There he is on his, I believe, X account, showing that he's running for president. The lawsuit is seeking to argue that Trump should not be allowed to run for the White House based on Section 3 of that 14th Amendment. And it disqualifies individuals from holding public office if they have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States. Obviously, Trump has not been charged with insurrection, but Castro is pointing to his role in the January 6th plot to do so. I don't know, man. This ain't gonna go that far. That's really my main thought about this. What are you thinking?
I mean, I agree. I think that the argument has some merit, and I think that he's successfully circumvented the standing issue that caused the previous case to be dismissed. Because as someone who's running against Donald Trump within the Republican Party, he definitely has standing to bring this lawsuit because he will suffer, immediate and irreparable, harm if Trump is allowed to run. As a candidate individually. I think that the Supreme Court, of course, is never gonna take Trump off of the ballot. I think that it was a Hail Mary attempt. I think that his argument has a lot of merit. I think that a lot of legal scholars, I know that a lot of legal scholars have, also voiced this opinion and made the same argument that the 14th Amendment absolutely could be used to prevent Trump from running for president. But to that end, I think that I'm talking from a legal side of things. From a political side of things, I don't know if it's better. I think it might be worse because, if the Supreme Court thought that liberal protesters holding signs outside their house was bad when they overturned Roe v. Wade, if they ruled that Trump couldn't run, the hellstorm that would rain down upon them by Trump supporters would be something the likes of which they have never seen before. And I don't necessarily know if that's getting him off the ballot in this way is going to help. I think it might just legitimize him more in the eyes of supporters versus him actually running and losing an election or being indicted and having to go to jail.
That's definitely one thing that's definitely one thing that I think that they've successfully implemented in their constant drumbeat against anything that's going down with Donald Trump. It's this connection of chaos versus legality or normal politics, democracy, all that. So they've openly said things like that. If they do this, then the chaos that'll come down the supporters that'll get so upset and take to the streets. So they're supposed to be pumping this fear into so many people and wondering, hey, if we do the right thing, if we prosecute him just like everyone else, or implement laws on him that we do with anyone else, his supporters are so rabid and stupid that they might come out in the streets and cause more chaos. And do we really want that? Let's just maybe calm on some of these things and hope that he just loses normally without us actually following processes that we would do if it was anyone else. Let's keep it real. Because by the way, he did say this is graphic 5, because you talked about whether or not this will be legally and based off whether or not the real actions of our law and constitution. Donald Trump don't care about that. This is what he said. He said almost all legal scholars, lying, have voiced opinions that the 14th Amendment has no legal basis or standing relative to the upcoming 24 election. Like election interference, it's just another trick being used by the radical left communists. Okay, here's the list. Communists, Marxists, fascists to again steal an election that their candidate, the worst, most incompetent, most corrupt president in history, is incapable. Again, they're communists, Marxists, and fascists somehow. Who knows? They're also capitalists too. Who gives a damn? Let's just throw all kinds of ists out there and see how many things can stick and pump enough fear into folks. But by the way, as I point out, he said almost all legal scholars. Which ones are not doing it, Donnie? Well, let's look at this headline from New York Times, because this case from conservatives will emerge to disqualify Trump again with this 14th Amendment. A couple law professors at the Federalist Society wrote that the original meaning of the 14th Amendment makes Trump ineligible as well. You see, it whistled again. But you gotta understand, that's my only 5 seconds of an hour and a half to take a sip of water, just so you know. I mention it every time, so I'm sure you guys are on it. Let's jump to Ken Paxton down in Texas. Let's take a trip down there. Let's go here.
How can you indict the left if the good guys, the good law enforcement officers, are impeached? And other attorneys generals are watching and they're taking notice. This is a massive chilling project to chill the speech and the activity of bold attorneys general. We must stand against the impeachment of Ken Paxton. We must not support the impeachment of Ken Paxton. We must rally behind the principle that Ken Paxton has done a lot of good for the people of Texas.
If you ever need to know sometimes the biases of people that are talking, just replace that with maybe a Democratic AG or even president, anyone that's in any position that then he'll say, well, you can't just do that because people like him. Well, there's always people who like politicians. Is that the reason why they can do anything they want? Charlie Kirk there trying to defend Ken Paxton without really going through some of the things that he's been accused of, or reasons why many Republicans are also against him. Now, when Republicans go against someone who's a powerful figure in a state like Texas, something really must have been wrong. But he finished there by saying he's done so many things for the people of Texas. So imagine which people of Texas he thinks he's done good things for, and whether or not he's ignored other good people of Texas, and whether or not they matter in this thing we call democracy. Here's some headlines here. Did he do well for for transgender folks in Texas? Because as this headline pointed out, they sought to seek some state data specifically on transgender Texans, because why? Who knows? Because they're second-class citizens in his mind, and he should be enforcing different laws on them. Maybe someone who had an unwanted pregnancy, because Texas sues to block Biden's abortion medication guidance. That's something else that Ken Paxton was on board with as well. How about the energy grid and how people died? Whether it's extreme heat or it's extreme cold, as we remember when Ted Cruz ran away from his state. Ken Paxton, this headline points out from the Texas Observer, for ExxonMobil climate investigation to be stopped. Wow. He doesn't want that to happen either. Who's he doing good work for the people of Texas, or is he doing good work for certain people that we're gonna talk about in a second? Lastly though, AG Ken Paxton asked the Supreme Court to overturn Trump's defeat by negating 10 million votes in 4 states. So do you think those 10 million votes in those 4 states are people that he's doing good work for? Because they voted, and last I checked, we can do that in this country. We can vote, and then we don't have to have AGs or anyone else that's looking to hand elections over to Donald Trump to try and negate them. That's the big problem that's going on, but who cares about other Americans, Ray?
Right, I think Charlie Kirk and his asymmetrical hairline sitting there and defending Ken Paxton of all people is fascinating, because we'll get into it in a minute. I mean, he's being charged with actual crimes. Ken Paxton might go to jail. This is not, he's been a horrible attorney general for a million political reasons, but he's also a particularly corrupt individual. So the idea that he just has some people who still support him, should prevent him from, being impeached is an absurd notion. He's gung-ho about impeaching Joe Biden. There are plenty of people who support Joe Biden. By his own logic, Joe Biden should be unimpeachable. I mean, it's ridiculous, but yeah, there's so much more that we should get into. So that's all I'll say.
Yeah, the graphics aren't up here, but this is a little bit of the short story because there's a guy named Nathan is the actual name, Nate Paul. And he's a real estate developer. He has a bunch of money and he bribed Ken Paxton, allegedly. He's been accused of bribing Ken Paxton and basically using the AG office to defend him against any political or professional opponents, like straightforward, right in the open, again, to the degree to which many Republicans have then gone up against him as well, because why would they want that? Well, we could see why they would, but there must be other political reasons behind this as well, though. So anyway, this trial that then kicked off this week, I believe it was on Tuesday. The Senate here, the state Senate there, which of course is comprised of many Republicans, they're not sure how they're going to go with this vote. It's going to last a couple to 3 weeks as they go through this. So from NBC News, this is what's going on the opening day of that trial. Ken Paxton pleaded not guilty to those 20 articles of impeachment, alleging this corruption, abuse of public trust, misuse of public funds, and more, as they began this impeachment trial. His attorneys had filed more than a dozen motions to dismiss the articles of impeachment or exclude evidence from being considered. And all of them failed on Tuesday morning when as many as a dozen Republican senators joined with Democratic senators to vote against them. Wow, what's going on down in Texas? I thought they were a stronghold for MAGA. Steve Bannon, which we'll get to in a second, talks about how Texas is super MAGA. It's supreme MAGA. Well, apparently some of the Republicans don't like everything that's going on with MAGA. Paxton did secure one win on Tuesday, though, a small one. When Patrick, who alone decides procedural matters under the rules approved by the Senate, he decided that Paxton could not be forced to appear as a witness at his own trial. Okay, cool. I mean, it's a small thing, but there's enough evidence. Maybe he might want to appear and maybe say something different than what everyone is seeing, though. House impeachment managers had sought to compel Paxton to be called to the witness stand, even though they said in the filing that they expected he would invoke that right. So it's pretty obvious that would go down. But also lastly, Tuesday afternoon, impeachment managers called their first witness, though, Jeff Mateer, who's the former second in command at the Attorney General's office, who resigned in October of 2020 after meeting with FBI agents about the Paxton-Nathan Paul relationship. So again, these are Republicans that worked around him, and they're the one who put him on blast. They're the ones who snitched him out to the authorities and why this whole thing started. But still, you'll hear people say these Democrats are coming after Ken Paxton because they just don't like that he's a strong Republican. That's the thought, but actually there's people that are mad at many Republicans, which we'll get to in a second. Any thoughts before we jump to that theory?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such an absurd argument to be making to say that, the Democrats who have had a stranglehold on the Texas State House and the Texas Senate are the ones coming after Ken Paxton. Like, this is a firmly Republican state that has had, Republican control of their state legislature for a long time. And the lead prosecutor in this impeachment trial is a Republican. So the idea that this is a Democrat attack, it is a bipartisan effort to hold this man accountable. Of course, there are plenty of Republicans in the Texas Senate who are defending Ken Paxton, but there are plenty of Republicans who are, prosecuting him, seeking, to hold him accountable. So I mean, it really is a ridiculous way for Charlie Kirk and other Republicans conservative influencers to paint this as like a Democrat plot.
It gets even better because first of all, here's some good old Republican threats coming from one Republican to many others that maybe won't do the right thing. This guy's name is Jonathan Stickland. I think he started one of these pro-Paxton super PACs. So he's all over the place trying to promote things about how they need to be more conservative and Republicans need to act like Republicans. Here he is talking to Steve Bannon about it.
We're spending millions of dollars. We think this is a huge fight. We already have spent an incredible amount of money. We will not let these politicians overturn the will of the voters who said we want Ken Paxton. They knew all the information that has been brought out on this, and anyone that votes against Ken Paxton in this impeachment is risking their entire political career, and we will make sure that that is the case.
Wow. Wow, indeed. I had to keep the
insightful commentary.
What do you think it was? Wow, wait. Did you say you're threatening the political careers of any Republican that won't vote the way that you, the head of this super PAC, former state representative down in Texas, if they don't vote your way and vote with Ken Paxton and not based off whether or not this was illegal activities and whether or not this impeachment is actually something that they should be doing, it should be just based off of their political careers. We see how politics works. It sounds like a gangster movie, doesn't it? We're gonna come and end your career. Maybe something else. We'll see more though, because apparently this guy Stickland is talking about how the deep state is working against him as well too. He knows all about it. I don't know how he knows everything, but he does.
Why are we dealing with an impeachment of an attorney general by Republicans, given everything that's going on in Texas?
I believe that Ken Paxton has inflicted pain on the swamp in a way that they have decided they are no longer going to allow him to function. So we've got a witch hunt going on here in Texas, orchestrated by the globalists, the leftover Bush regime here in Texas. And that's what we're fighting today. This is not just about Texas. We've seen what they did in Arizona with Kerry Lake. And we watched them steal that election. We saw what they did to Trump, and they've been doing all this stuff. Now they're testing out whether they can completely get around the voters and not even try and take the election at the ballot box, but that a group of elected officials with the help of the Democrats can team up and take out our conservative heroes.
He's the conservative hero. He's one of the conservative heroes. And for some reason, again, I need an explanation as to why these hard-nosed Republicans, these good constitutional conservatives, why they would be swept suddenly into this whole mix with these rabidly anti-American Democrats. How did they get fooled into this whole thing so much? I think he has the answer for that as well too, because he was told all about it.
I was told this was going to happen during the last election by the people who spent over $10 million against Ken Paxton. This was a threat that the establishment put out there before voters went to the polls and voted overwhelmingly for Ken Paxton. They said that if Ken Paxton wins the next election, the Democrats will lead an impeachment with the help of some rhinos, and he will be taken down. And here we are today, exactly what they threatened and tried to scare voters into voting against Ken Paxton with is actually coming out.
It's actually coming out, Ray. Hey, cut and dry, open and shut case, because Jonathan Stickland said so.
It's really funny that this is happening on Steve Bannon's show, because Steve Bannon should be rotting in a jail cell right now for fraud, and without the help of Donald Trump, that's exactly where he would be. So of course he's gonna stick with Ken Paxton, who's also been accused of a different type of fraud. But I mean, of course that it's funny for him to make that argument, because they had the inklings of the information. They knew that he was engaged in corruption before the election. So of course the people who opposed him knew that if he was reelected, they would have, the ability to do something exactly like this. It's not like they were whispering in back rooms and he overheard it. Like, the writing was on the wall. This man has been engaged in corruption. An impeachment trial was just coming down the way, inevitably.
100%. And by the way, some of the details that I wanted to look into more, because there was a Hill article about some of the things that Paxton had done, in case you guys hadn't been keeping track, because I can keep track of these other potential criminal activities when you have the former president doing so. But really fast, I mentioned the whole thing with Nate and Paul. But Paxton had been impeached because Paul allegedly did this. He convinced Paxton to use the state prosecutor's office to interfere with a federal investigation. A federal investigation against Nate Paul, because he had already been arrested. He was under a federal indictment about how much he had been breaking the laws as well too. He was accused of lying to investors to secure a loan. Sound a little bit like their dear leader, Donald Jesus Trump, because that's what he did as well too. I mean, allegedly, that's what they say he did. But in doing so, he allegedly bribed Ken Paxton to start using the AG's office as a place to go against some of these criminal, allegations against him legally, and also against some of his political enemies, because again, he has enough money. What country is this we're talking about? We keep talking about two-tier justice systems. We keep talking about third world countries, but these are the aspects of it that actually show some of those characteristics, carried out by the most powerful people in the country, and in this case, the state. And now he still has people still backing him up. This is the United States of America, you guys, and if we not able to pay attention because they're too busy trying to eat or make it to the doctor or get our kids to school, or they're stripping more rights there. It doesn't even matter anymore. It's all part of the whole plan. I know you've heard that a million times as well too.
A central figure in the attack on the U.S. Capitol has been handed the stiffest prison sentence so far. A judge ruled that Enrique Tarrio, one-time leader of the far-right Proud Boys, will spend 22 years behind bars. While not physically present during the January 6th riot, he directed others and celebrated afterward, saying in a text message, "Make no mistake, we did this."
You heard it there on NBC News. Enrique Tarrio, one of the leaders of the Proud Boys, has been sentenced to 22 years. Yes, he'd already been convicted of all of his conspiracies surrounding January 6th, but he's breaking that record from Oath Keeper. What was his name again? Stuart Rhodes. Stuart Rhodes only got 18 years. That guy that wanted to celebrate going to prison. Enrique Tarrio has broken the record, and as we know, maybe we'll break some more records. They still got more guys to go. But here's more about how he got those 22 years and the things that he was dancing around and saying in court. Let's go with this.
Prosecutors had sought 33 years for Tarrio, but Judge Timothy Kelly decided that was too long. Kelly also sentenced 4 other Proud Boys last week to lengthy prison terms, but far less than prosecutors had asked for. Tarrio and 3 other Proud Boys were convicted in May of seditious conspiracy. Prosecutors said their goal was to orchestrate violence to keep then-President Trump in office, and that the Proud Boys were behind every major breach of the Capitol during the attack. Afterwards on CNN, Tarrio ridiculed members of Congress who huddled in fear as rioters breached the building.
I'm not going to cry about a group of people that don't give a crap about their constituents.
But a different tone in court today, telling the judge, "I am not a political zealot," and saying to the men and women of law enforcement who answered the call that day, "I'm sorry."
I'm sorry. I'm a tough guy. It's weird how guys go from I'm tough to I'm sorry once they're in front of a judge and they've been convicted, and now they're facing 22 years. Yeah, 22 years. We'll see how much of that he serves, but at least the sentence seems somewhat feasible. I think people were thinking he was going to get much less, considering how bad guys always get off when it comes to being in connection with government corruption like this. But here's some more details from NBC News of how this whole thing went down. Tarrio was not at the Capitol on January 6th, though. Crazy. He was arrested about 48 hours before the attack because of his actions at a previous pro-Trump event in Washington. Pause. You know what that previous pro-Trump event was in Washington and what it ended up being? It ended up being him, collected with a few other Proud Boys, ripping a Black Lives Matter sign off of a historically black church in Washington, D.C. and burning it, putting it all over whatever cameras and videos that they can put it on, and celebrating how badass they were. Then he was arrested a couple days before January 6th because he was in town to take part in what he was helping to plan. Let's continue because I just said it. Let's read it. Tarrio knew a warrant was out for his arrest, thanks to a Washington police lieutenant who has since been charged and pleaded not guilty. Prosecutors said that the evidence suggests Tarrio strategically calculated his arrest as a means to inspire a reaction by his followers. Keep all this in mind after you heard him say, "I'm sorry and I didn't mean to do all this stuff," because this is what he really believes. To Tarrio, January 6th was an act of revolution, is what prosecutors wrote. They argued for a terrorism sentencing enhancement, saying his actions were clearly intended to influence the government. The judge agreed, applying the terrorism enhancement in his case, as he did for his other 4 co-defendants, why they're getting so many years here. But his defense attorneys thought that this one thing would work, Ray. He said, "My client is no terrorist. My client is a misguided patriot." That's what lawyer Sabino Jarugui said, arguing that his client went to Washington just to protest, that's all. "My client comes from a country," this is the other part about this. "My client comes from a country where there are no rights, there's nothing," he said, talking about Tarrio's Cuban heritage. He was trying to protect this country, as misguided as he was. He's just a figure that's been misunderstood, and he just wants justice because all he knows is Cuban. Tarrio's defense team also argued for a downward departure from the sentencing guidelines, seeking an unspecified lower sentence, and they submitted letters to support to the court. And one of those included one from a cousin of Tarrio who has worked for Miami police for 16 years. Don't forget, remember there was a police officer that tipped him off that there was a warrant out for him too? What's the point of having someone who works in law enforcement if you can't have connections? Sorry, there's the back end of that. The defense had asked Kelly to see another side of Tarrio that is benevolent, cooperative with law enforcement, useful in the community, hardworking with a tight-knit family unit and community support. Ray, it's odd that someone with tight-knit community, with great family, has police officers in his family, as a cousin, comes from a horrible country, and he's now a reformed great American, would do such a thing. It might make you wonder that you can be from a tight-knit family, have law enforcement in your family, come from some other country that we deem worse than us, and then still do horrible things. So every time they tell you that criminals only come from single mother family households and are at-risk youth and are black and brown folks only, maybe you'll believe it, but when it comes to coming from those communities, we can use that to say they shouldn't have any consequences for the things that he did.
Yeah, so a couple of things about this. First, I think that Cubans would be interested to learn that they have no rights. They have nothing, according to Tarrio's attorney. Just there are no laws and no rights in Cuba, so that's one thing. But also, I'll just say that Enrique Tarrio is a really fascinating character because they say that he's worked with law enforcement. This is true. This guy has been selling out his fellow patriots for years, right? He's been making back-end deals for quite some time. But also, Enrique Tarrio was running a t-shirt press company where he would sell not just right-wing slogans on shirts, he would also sell left-wing slogans on shirts. This is a man who was an opportunist. He was cashing in on what he was doing. So, but the idea that he was not, a true believer in Donald Trump is irrelevant to what he actually did. Because if he was just playing a character, he was just playing a character who committed heinous crimes and deserves to be in jail. And even if he was playing a character, which I think is a lot of what the argument in his defense has been, even if he was just playing a character, that character inspired people to be involved with the Proud Boys at as the video said, every major breach of the Capitol on January 6th. So, it's the rule of goats. At a certain point, it doesn't matter if you're just playing a role of this macho guy, leader of the Proud Boys. That person is real to the people that he's inspired. That person was real enough to commit crimes. So it's irrelevant whether or not he was just cashing in on a grift. That grift has resulted in him having to spend the next 22 years of his life behind bars, deservedly.
Well, as they also point out throughout all this evidence, he was texting about it, posting about how it is, never give up, this was totally us, all that stuff. So I don't know if there was much of defense about what it is that he did, or if it's just they should have some leniency because he's one of our guys. Who cares? What does the law have to do with that? I thought it was blind justice. There's other aspects of this that show just how little remorse he actually has for this, outside of the fact that he was just trying to make some money and also maybe somehow come up with some kind of revolutionary name for himself. It's an unimportant person that wants to be important, and they found some levels of it. It's just it was based off of crime and corruption. This is big stuff, and it's actually indicative of what it is that Donald Trump wants, and he has some help. Donald Trump is looking to be in the White House one more time, but this time he wants to have an entire group of government set up for him, by him, and only bow to him. It sounds pretty normal for him, because dozens of right-wing groups are being led by the Heritage Foundation to do just that for him. And they're fueled by his administration and their goals to take over the country and have this dictatorial White House that he's looking to dream of. So let's go to details from the Associated Press. It was a nearly 1,000-page document called Project 2025. It's a handbook, and they say that an army of Americans is the idea behind to have the civic infrastructure in place to take on day one in the White House. They look to reshape and do away with what Republicans deride as the deep state bureaucracy. Think of deep state as we go through some of the details of this. In part by firing as many as 50,000 federal workers. Project 2025's nearly 1,000-page policy blueprint called Mandate for Leadership serves as a step-by-step guide for the incoming president, hoping that it's Trump, from proposing a comprehensive transformation of the Department of Justice to ending the FBI's efforts to combat the dissemination of misinformation. They want to stop the FBI from blocking misinformation. Only people that are spreading misinformation would want to do that. Still, though, it even includes plans to intensify the prosecution of individuals involved in providing or distributing abortion pills by mail. Let's just toss that in there as well, too. Why not? As Trump is doing this, he's zeroing in on a key target of retribution, government workers. That's the 50,000 he's looking to oust and replace with his own people. Again, helped out by the Heritage Foundation. He released a list of proposals to take down what many conservatives believe is a secret cabal of government workers who wield enormous power and work against Republicans. At the top of Trump's list is reinstituting an executive order known as Schedule F. It would reclassify tens of thousands of federal employees involved in policy decisions as at-will employees. It makes it much easier for Trump to just fire folks the same way that Elon Musk fired people randomly at Twitter, now X, and then starts destroying things and suiting it to just serve himself. It's a blueprint, so he's gonna go with it as well, too. There's some Trump-era conservatives that wanna gut this administrative state. This sounds like he's trying to implement a deep state while he's talking about getting rid of a deep state. They've been talking about deep state since he first went down that stupid escalator and said he's gonna run for president of the United States, and then said, we're going after the deep state. Now they're going after the deep state, but they wanna implement their own. Odd how that works. Well, they'll tell you they're doing the opposite of exactly what they're doing, and enough idiots will listen to it. But by ousting these federal employees, they believe they're standing in the way of the president's agenda, and they replace him with like-minded individuals that'll do his bidding. A whole bunch of minions. What's your thoughts here, Ray?
I think that as someone who's like somewhat familiar with the administrative state, that this is absolutely hilarious to read about. The idea that there's just 50,000 highly partisan government employees who are, trying to 50,000 people who are coordinated in their attempts to block Trump. Most of these are just regular people who have jobs, and just because they work for the government, and these are not particularly high level positions they're talking about. These are just people that work for the government in a largely non-political capacity, implementing certain policies. And at the end of the day, the president does have the right to enact their agenda. They don't have to fire 50,000 employees in order to do that. But I mean, it's the idea that this is fighting against the deep state by simply implementing the new deep state. I mean, it's laughable on its face. And I think that this comes from the idea, and I think we saw some parallels to this. I'll make a comparison to Elon Musk buying Twitter. Elon Musk bought Twitter, and he really genuinely believed that it was, I don't know, that's what his position was, that he believed that it was being run by liberals who were attempting to silence conservatives. And when he got there, he didn't find that was actually what was going on. So he had to sort of create a narrative around it, with the Twitter files, and he had to hire the likes of, Barry and Matt Taibbi to sort of front this narrative, but they didn't have much evidence to be able to do that. So it was really just grasping at straws. It's the same thing with the concept of the deep state. Trump took office and he didn't get rid of the deep state because it didn't exist in the form that he had been perpetuating along the campaign trail, that he had been espousing to his followers. He got there and realized it's just not like that. So the idea that this would be anything other than, because in effect, he's changing the ability to fire these people, making it a lot easier to fire them. But he's then instituting people who are, I guess he's rounding up 50,000 psychotic Trump supporters to put into these roles just to execute his agenda. And in effect, creating the very thing that he has supposedly been railing against, but just in terms more positively to suit him.
If you're a sucker that believes that there's this deep state that somehow just got implemented by Joe Biden a couple of years ago, during Trump's administration, or maybe before Trump's administration, who knows? Because they just keep talking about the deep state exists and it works only for Democrats, because these are career folks who work in the government, because they have a standard of way things go. If you ever watch closely, if you're a crazy person like me and has watched closely, maybe Senate hearings, House proceedings on the floor, and there's someone that always has the gavel, it changes hands. And the person there, every time they do any kind of motion, anytime they say anything on the mic, from one person speaking across the room to another, there's someone that whispers in the ear. Have you guys noticed that before? There's always someone who creeps up halfway in the view and whispers something of what they should say. And then this elected official who's supposed to know everything then recites it. because they don't really know what they're doing. There's people that work in the government that know everything they're doing, how procedures work, and they tell our elected officials who are actually elected just to run for their same office yet again, or maybe the next one, that's their job. That's why all they do is raise money. There's people who actually know how our government works, and they have to tell them and recite to them step by step like a kindergartner. Now say this, John. Now say this, Nancy. Now say this, Michael. That's the way that this whole thing is, and maybe these people are needed. Maybe outside chance until someone like an authoritarian figure like Donald Trump comes along and says, no, let's just do things my way. And I need a bunch of sycophants that tell me I can do it. That's how he's gotten this far anyway. So because of some of the hurdles that he did have during that administration, when it comes to people within his administration, within the government, folks that he thought were on his side because they had an R next to their name, they blocked some of those things. They were like, this isn't normal process. He wants that to end as well too. He's just setting it up. So if Joe Biden has 50,000 unelected deep staters in his in government, why is it okay for Donald Trump to have it? Supporters of Trump, ask yourself that question if you think that's American or not, or if you just don't like this country. You can say that too because it's pretty obvious. Let's take this break though, you guys. We've got the aftermath coming up in a second. In which we'll talk about many more things. What are we going to talk about? The lobbyist issue, of course, in Washington, D.C. Who is it that's bringing in more? You might be surprised by that. We've got more of that happening as well as we go through these last few stories. So please, get comfortable. Get 2 handfuls of booty cheeks. We'll see you next second.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Damage Report. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, John Adarola. I'll see you soon.